Reading this history, one wonders how successful Hitler's Nazi Party would have been in its rise to power. Without the staunch support of Pope Pius VI and the Vatican. The Vatican and the Catholic Church had for many centuries been an influential political and ideological force in European politics. What could it have achieved if they had opposed Hitler and worked to undermine his ambitions? Germany's ex-chancellor Heinrich Brüning had no doubts about who was primarily responsible for this nightmarish alliance. Behind the agreement with Hitler stood not the Pope but the Vatican bureaucracy and its leader Pacelli. Brüning said in 1935 he visualized an authoritarian state and an authoritarian church directed by the Vatican bureaucracy, the two to conclude an eternal league with one another. Read that powerful and complete admission again. He visualized an authoritarian state and an authoritarian church directed by the Vatican bureaucracy, the two to conclude an eternal league with one another. Cardinal Pacelli, the man former Chancellor Brüning believed was more responsible than anyone else in bringing Hitler to power, later became Pope Pius VII, the Pope during the Second World War. Most people know little about Hitler's connection with Catholicism, but the truth is that Hitler and his cabal of leaders worked together with the Vatican hierarchy to resurrect the Holy Roman Empire. In fact, without the Vatican's assistance, it is possible Hitler would never have gotten control of Germany. Pius VII and the Jews. In a cabinet meeting 6 days before the signing of the Reich Concordat in July 1933, Hitler made a chilling statement about the imminent pact. This concorded with the Vatican, he said, would create an atmosphere of confidence that would be especially significant in the urgent struggle against international Jewry. Think about what he's saying here. Hitler knew that an alliance with the Catholic Church would be advantageous to his urgent struggle against international Jewry. There are a couple of ways to interpret this. Did Hitler believe that the Vatican was an enemy of the Jews and therefore a supporter of his objectives with the Jews? At the very least, Hitler was obviously confident that the Vatican would not do anything to prevent him from pursuing his genocidal ambitions towards Jews. History testifies to Cardinal Pacelli's opinion of the Jews. There is no evidence Cardinal Pacelli blinked an eye at Hitler's horrific ambitions. Rather, as John Cornwell brings out in Hitler's Pope, Pacelli had a habit of ignoring the plight of the Jews and turning a blind eye to other Nazi atrocities. When he was made Pope on March 2, 1939, Pacelli took on the name Pope Pius VII. As Pope, Pius knew all about Hitler's heinous strategy, called the final solution to eradicate the Jewish people. Jewish groups and allied officials repeatedly urged the Pope to publicly condemn Nazi savagery. Finally, in December 1942, after 2 years of persistent requests, Pius delivered a radio address in which he lamented for the many thousands who sometimes only by reason of their nationality or race are marked down for death or gradual extinction. That was Pius VII's strongest objection to Hitler's genocidal rampage. He didn't even identify Hitler by name, and there was no mention of Nazis or Jews. There are many ways to interpret this. Not ignorant of Hitler and his view of Jews, Pius, like the rest of humanity, was witness to the fruits of Hitler's labor, both toward Jews and other peoples. He undoubtedly had access to better intelligence and knew more of the details about what was happening than most people. Yet his response was so impotent. Why was it? Because he shared similar views with Hitler about the Jews? Less than a year after his 1942 radio address, Pius witnessed Hitler's hatred of the Jews in a very personal way. In October 1943, nearly 400 German SS soldiers arrested Italian Jews in Rome's Old Ghetto, which is walking distance from the Vatican. All totaled, more than 1,000 Jews were rounded up and taken to a building called Collegio Militare, which was located less than half a mile from the Vatican. Trucks carting Jews even rumbled by St. Peter's Square so Nazi soldiers could see the famous church. As you would expect, the Pope was one of the first to be made aware of what was happening to his next-door neighbors. The Jews were held for 2 days at Collegio Militare before being put into cattle cars and dispatched to Auschwitz. The 80% were gassed within a week. The rest were made slaves. Pope Pius VII was silent and did nothing to help the innocent Jews during their 2-day confinement in a facility less than a half a mile from the Vatican. He was the most powerful religious man in the world. When he spoke, people listened. Few leaders would have able to pick up the phone and speak with Hitler directly. But Pope Pius VII was one of the few. At the very least, he could have told the world what was happening and publicly denounced Hitler. He could have initiated a protest. Instead, he was silent. Why? Journalist Ed Bradley recounted these events during a 60 Minutes episode on March 19, 2000. During an interview with one of the 15 Jewish survivors, the survivor asked, "Didn't the Pope know where they were taking us? Didn't he ask himself where those railroad tracks ended up? We were right under his window, but his voice wasn't lifted. Nobody came, not even to save a child." Bradley relayed that question to Peter Gumpel, a Jesuit priest, an eminent Catholic historian, who responded by explaining that Pius was unable to leave the Vatican because it was surrounded by German troops. The Pope could have been arrested, Gumpel said. Bradley's response was ideal. But wouldn't that be kind of action that the true saint would have taken? Wouldn't that have been what Christ would have done? Gumpel was stumped. Finally, he replied and said that he didn't know what Christ would have done. That's not a reassuring response coming from a man who's supposed to be an expert on Christ. It gets worse. But wait, it gets worse. Gumpel is one of the Vatican's senior saint makers and happened to be in charge of Pope Pius VII's beautification process, the final step before becoming a so-called saint. Gumpel had spent 3 decades researching Pius' life to see if he was worthy of sainthood. For 30 years, he had been searching for evidence that would preclude Pope Pius VII from beautification, and he said he hadn't found any. During that 60 Minutes program, Gumpel stated that he totally convinced Pius did what he could to help the Jews during World War II, that he was a holy person and that he should be beautified. When asked if the research Cornwell had uncovered and reported in Hitler's Pope would have any bearing on the Vatican's final decision, Gumpel said it would have no effect whatsoever because it's totally worthless from a historical point of view. Totally worthless. Really? Did Gumpel forget that a significant chunk of Cornwell's research came from the Vatican's own library? For brutal Croatia, blessings. We know the Vatican provided political and moral support to Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany before and during World War II. But did you know that the Vatican and Catholic representatives actually participated in one of the hideous activities of Hitler and is not in some of the hideous activities of Hitler and his Nazi network, which is scattered all over Europe and North Africa? In July 1997, the United States Treasury published a document proving the Vatican stored gold for the Croatian Nazi puppet regime during and after World War II. The Vatican dismissed the accusation as ridiculous, but when asked by Jewish organizations to open its archives and prove that the allegations were false, the Vatican refused. Why? The truth is some of the Vatican's most atrocious acts during the war occurred in the Balkans. Conquering the Balkan Peninsula and bringing it under German control was important to Hitler. Controlling the Balkans would give him leverage over Russia, access to the Mediterranean, and a launching point into the Middle East. Hitler invaded Yugoslavia on April 6, 1941, and by April 17th had beaten the nation into submission. Following Yugoslavia's defeat, a small corner of the country broke away from the capitulated government and formed a puppet state. Comprised of roughly 5 million Catholics and 3 million Serbians, the new regime was called the Independent State of Croatia. Throughout the war, this newly born puppet state was loyal to 2 entities, Adolf Hitler and the Vatican. Croatia's first leader was Pavelić, a fascist with a calculating mind and a cold heart. Pavelić's first action as leader was to raise an army called Ustashi. Pavelić's army quickly became one of the most terrifying and cruel forces Europe had ever seen. The Ustashi was staunchly Catholic. Its soldiers were Catholic by religion, and the central reason for its existence was the pursuit of an independent Catholic Croatia. During the war, the Ustashi sought the genocide of Jews and Serbs and was responsible for the death of more than 1 million people. Killings were performed in some of the most gruesome ways imaginable. Ustashi soldiers were recorded to have torn victims apart limb by limb and slit people's throats with special knives and removed organs one by one and smashed people's heads with sledgehammers. Others were burned alive, no one was spared, and many of these vile acts were performed on children and infants. There are records of Ustashi soldiers cutting open pregnant mothers and ripping out the unborn child. The Vatican was fully aware of the atrocities being performed by Pavelić and his army, yet it never did anything meaningful to condemn and stop the carnage. In fact, as Mark Ahrens and John Loftus, 2 respected award-winning authors, reveal in their book, Unholy Trinity, the Vatican endorsed the behavior of Ustashi and Croatia's Catholic leaders. From the start, Croatia enjoyed a special relationship with the Vatican, wrote Ahrens and Loftus. Pope Pius VII was aware of the atrocities, and when he met the Pavelić in April 1941, the Pope met with Pavelic again in May 1943, by which time the Nazi atrocities against the Serbs were irretrievably known. One Italian journalist interviewed Pavelic in his home and was